Good morning, Jeffco. This is Shauna. So we're here on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So to joined by Dr. Susan Leach, who is the Chief Student Success Officer, and she has joined us for this Ask Dr. Leach. So she has been with the district for a few years. So and took over. Is it just this year, or it feels to me like you've been doing it for years now? So our Chief Student Success Officer. I know the number of people that we have referred to you to help individual families who are just struggling has been uh, really amazing. So, and as far as I can tell, with the feedback that I've received, you have been batting 100, helping individual families with issues that are going on with their kids. So I'm just going to go ahead and let you speak. If you haven't gotten a chance to see Dr. Leach's keynote address for our Jeffco PTA Fall Conference, you really should watch that. So she's a mother too. So she not only is she a doctor of psychology, but she's also a mother and struggled through the same things that we do with our kids. So her perspective is extremely valuable, and the assistance that she's given all of us has been just truly phenomenal. So, Dr. Leach, you've got yourself unmuted. That's perfect. I'm going to put your video up here as a spotlight, and I will just start reading some of the questions. But please feel free to say hello to everybody.
Mhm. Hi, good morning, everyone. Shauna, thank you. You're always so kind. I feel very fortunate to do the work that I do. I love helping families and students, so I'm happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to answering the questions. So fire
All right.
away whenever you're ready.
All right, here we go. The first one, and I'm not going to use student names or parent names. Sometimes I don't think I have any school names. We'll try to avoid that too, so it's not too specific. I don't want to identify anyone. The first one is, how would you suggest that a GE, and she might mean a GT teacher, adapt for students with low processing speeds, which is quite often associated with ASD and learning disabilities?
So I'm wondering two things. One is if it's GT or if they're meaning general education. So
Could general
any
That
education.
was, it was my question, and it's a general education classroom.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
So what I was thinking about is that slower processing speed, and originally thinking about GT is slow processing speed is also very common with GT students. So it's kind of the rule rather than the exception. And so um, I would say that in general, there are a number of different areas of disability or disorder that are associated with a slower processing speed. So it really doesn't, not so much matter what the exact disability or disorder is, but really looking at what are the strategies that I can use to combat that when I see it. So for me, one of the most foundational things that a teacher can do is have a really well established routine and structure in the classroom. So, if you think about anything that a student doesn't have to exhaust brain power on and so that they can focus on content will be helpful. And one of the most foundational things I can think of is having an environment where the student knows what to expect every day. When I come in, I do this, and the first thing we do is this, and then we do this, and then we do this. When you are in an environment, and I, as a school psychologist, would be in and out of lots of different classrooms, so I've seen the gamut. And when you walk into a classroom that's super, super busy and visually stimulating, and then there isn't a very well established routine, the student is then having to exhaust brain power trying to grasp what's happening today because it's different than what we did yesterday. So, to the extent that you can have a predictable routine and structure in the classroom, I think that's a foundational piece. In terms of teaching strategies, then I would say Some very basic things are giving students some extra wait time. So when you have an environment where you're like rapid fire, popping off questions and wanting students to answer very quickly, a student that's a slower processor not only is not going to be able to flourish in that kind of environment, but it's also going to exacerbate some anxiety because they know I'm not going to be able to do this. I am speaking to you from experience on this because I am one of those people. I like to have some time to prepare and think. And it's really challenging for me when I get put on the spot because I just like to process through things. And so, one thing that I've seen teachers do that's really successful is they do some cueing. So they'll say, for example, at the end of class, they'll say, tomorrow I'm going to be asking you about, and you're giving that child a cue that I can be ready to answer this tomorrow when I come to class. In some situations, I've seen teachers even do that with a specific student. Johnny, be ready to answer this tomorrow. So it gives them time to think through. You're not giving them the answer, you're just cueing them ahead of time that this is something that they can confidently raise their hand and be able to answer because they've had time to think through it. Other things you can do, and of course some of this would depend on the developmental level of the where what you're teaching, what grade levels you're teaching, but any kind of like guide or visual schedules, visual guides, a rubric. So if you're asking a student to do an assignment and you explain it, having something in writing that they can take home because they may not be catching everything that you're explaining. Some other things just for consideration are, is the child slow processing visual information? Is it auditory information? Are they slow more motorically, where they might be hearing you, but their motor processing is a little delayed, so it's hard for them to write? And if it's hard for them to write quickly and keep up with what the information they're hearing in a written form, then providing guided notes or notes where they're I would say there are a few different kinds of notes that you can provide, either the close or the guided notes where you're providing most of the information and they're just having to plug in words or phrases. So it's helping them to listen because they're trying to listen to follow along the notes and then plugging in, and then they have a tool to take with them for studying later. So trying to think through extra wait time. Also, if you're doing some of these basics and the things that you think are in your normal repertoire of teaching strategies, and the student still isn't being successful, then I would be looking at the next level. Like, do they need more formalized accommodations? Can you do like reduce the amount of work? So you're not reducing any skill sets, you're not lowering the bar and not having them not have to learn the same thing as everyone else, but say, for example, you're doing double digit multiplication and you have students do 25 of those every night. Well, you could cut those down. So they're still having to master the same skill set, but maybe not demonstrate the same number or complete the same number of problems as other students. So some of those things we would normally memorialize in a 504 plan, or if it's even more serious than that, possibly an IEP. So just depends on the level of severity.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. The next one is, how can parents improve their fifth graders' focus while doing remote learning? And this is also a GT student.
Okay. So I will probably sound like a broken record because I'm there are a lot of foundational things that I would just lay as the groundwork to make sure are in place. And I would say those are healthy sleep hygiene, eating healthy meals, um, and then having a dedicated workspace. So a quiet distraction-free place for them to work. Adhering to a routine. Whenever I talk to parents, there is nothing about parenting that is not helped by children being in a routine, structured, predictable environment. It just helps with so many things, whether it's academics or behavior. Predictability is a good thing for kids. It helps them feel safe. It helps them know what's next. So if you've established all of those things, you have a nice quiet environment, there's no TV going on in the other room, there's nothing exciting happening in the other room that your child's wanting to get out so they can hear what's happening or be a part of what's happening, then I would say there are some simple things you can do. And I think that one of the things that I think is important is whenever you can, teaching your child the skills that they need to be successful. So self-monitoring techniques, and some of these things you can very easily Google online, like self-monitoring. And there's lots of different strategies to help students monitor their own behavior and attentiveness. You can set up a reward system. You can use a timer. And some of this will depend on what kind of structure your remote learning has. I know the schools are handling this differently, and some are doing very synchronous work. So which I think does help with engagement, I will say that. But if they're working asynchronously, then using a timer and say, hey, let's set the timer for 30 minutes, work for 30 minutes, and then you get them out and take a brain break or get some exercise or get a healthy snack. But helping them to take ownership for their learning, but also rewarding them if they're working hard, then take a break. So those would be my basics. If you're, again, going beyond that and you're still feeling like this just isn't working, I would also try partnering with the school and seeing if they're seeing anything that they think might be helpful to you as well.
Thank you. The next one is, what are good tools to help with the child self-esteem and to switch the conversation when our kids are talking negatively about themselves?
Yeah. So I don't know any kid who hasn't done this. So I would be looking at the extent to which they're doing it, and I would kind of divide my response into a couple different strategies. So from a proactive standpoint, not in the moment when this is happening, but every other moment, there are some things that you can be doing. So first and foremost, monitor your own behavior and what are you modeling. So a lot of times kids are just modeling what they're seeing, and if there's someone around them who's reacting strongly or negatively, or oh, I'm so stupid, and I'm guilty of this, I do this all the time, like, oh, I'm such an idiot, I did this, but kids hear that and then they repeat it. So monitoring your behavior, using praise, and there are some real specific ways to use praise that are strategic and genuine. So when we just use these kind of global phrases that are really non-specific and like, oh, you're just amazing, oh, you're beautiful, oh, you're the best, they're very well intended, but there are some real much more strategic things that you can do that have a better effect. And also it's possible to overpraise, and that has a negative impact. So doing it in a genuine and strategic way. So for example, praising the effort that a student puts into, or your child puts into a project, is better than saying you're the best, you're awesome, wow, I see you're really working hard on that, wow, I love your work ethic, this is really great. Or the process, or finishing something to the end is another, it's an important skill for kids to have, and it's important to recognize when they do that, wow, that was really hard, and you finished it. That was tough. I really love the way you hung in there on that one because I know it was challenging for you. So those are some things that you can do proactively to try to build kind of self-efficacy and self-esteem. In the moment, when you hear a student say like, I'm so stupid, I hate myself, I'm an idiot, there are a few things you can do. One is kind of challenging that, like, well, why do you say that? Or you sound really frustrated, tell me what's happening. So again, you're modeling calm. I'm not going to get reactionary. I'm not going to get really escalated. I'm just going to have a really calm response, a very calm business-like manner. Oh, why do you say that? It sounds like you're really frustrated. What I hear from you is frustration. What I hear is that you're really challenged by this homework. Tell me more about that. And then you move into this where you're walking alongside and you're helping problem solve. But if you've heard me talk before, you know, like I really am very passionate about saying, your job is not to swoop in and fix it. It's not to make it go away. It's not to say, don't worry about that, honey. We don't have to do it anymore. It's really being a thought partner with them and helping them generate, well, have you ever had a situation like this before? What have you done? What do you think? What could you do differently? Really struggling with that. What do you think we could do? What are some things you could do? And let them generate ideas for how to solve it. Because then when they get into that situation again and you're not there, they're already versed in, oh, I remember I need to start thinking through this. I remember I need to send an email to my teacher and ask for clarification about this. Oh, I know I need to take a break and walk away from this for 15 minutes and then maybe get a snack and come back and look at it again. So showing some empathy and understanding also is very helpful. So if you have a story that you can share, like, oh, I remember having something very similar happen to me, and this is how I worked it out. And um, when a student is in a moment um, like this, they often feel like they're the only one that it's happening to. So to the extent that you can kind of normalize it and not overreact, then you're helping them to do the same thing. Um,
Yeah, actually, you just reminded me, we actually talk a little bit about this modeling behavior, building self-esteem, and even some of the word and phrases that we choose in society in the suicide prevention
yep.
trainings that we provide. So if people haven't taken the suicide prevention trainings, everyone really actually needs to take that, everyone.
Yeah, highly, highly recommend that training.
So, and we will offer it to anyone. All you have to do is contact us and we can schedule it for your little group or your PTA, whichever. We are happy to do that. So the next one is, this one sounds like I think that this may be a family that's struggling and they're a little upset. But it's a good question. Why doesn't Jeffco invest in executive function coaching for young children with diagnosed disabilities such as ADHD as soon as a problem is known? Wouldn't it result in better outcomes than waiting for kids to develop anxiety and depression after years of struggle?
Yes, I completely agree with this person. And I will tell you that those are some of the things that I'm currently working on. And I come from Florida, as many of you know, and we are in Florida, we're one of the leaders in multi-tiered systems of support. So if you're not familiar with that, you'll sometimes hear it at the school. It's MTSS, and it really should be a way of work for all schools. And the reason it's important is for this very reason. It allows or gives schools a mechanism to intervene when a child is struggling before they've failed and had this need to go to special education. And the way they do that is by monitoring and collecting data and analyzing data on an ongoing, regular basis related to both behavior and academics. So they're looking at behavior exactly the way they look at academics. We collect baseline data and then we implement interventions when we see that based on our data. So we expect that 80 to 85% of kids should be getting the curriculum and sailing along, whether that's our social emotional learning curriculum or our math or literacy, whatever it is. If we don't see that, if we don't see 80 to 85% of the kids being successful, then we have a problem with our curriculum. So that's the first thing that we should be looking at in a system like this. But if we're there and we don't feel like there's a problem with the curriculum or there's a problem with the instruction, then we're looking at intervening for those kids who are struggling. And that allows us to start at the first sign of a problem. So we're in the process this year, since I've taken over in this position, I've been asking, just because I have such a strong background in this work, why don't we have a district-wide system in MTSS? And what I hear is that we have many schools that have some semblance of an MTSS system, but it's not consistent and they're not all doing the same things. And so that's what we're working on rolling out right now, is a district-wide system so that everybody in the district is using the same language and implementing the same process, so that if your child is in one school and they're struggling and they're getting some intervention, then they move to a different school, that school can very seamlessly pick up where the other one left off. And these are the kinds of interventions that a student might receive. We have a number of people in our district that are trained in intervention related to executive functioning and any number of other things. We have people that are trained in Orton Gillingham. So if your child's a struggling reader, there are people trained in curricula that would address that in a very research-based way. What I see as being more problematic is that we don't have system-wide structures to facilitate this. So this is a point well taken, and I would just say that you're preaching to the choir, because that is exactly the right thing to do, is that we intervene prior to a student needing special ed. I have seen this system work, and I have seen many students who may have otherwise been funneled into a special education program that, with some remediation and intervention, didn't need that and went on to be very successful. So I've seen this work. I believe in it strongly, and I think that if you're frustrated, I understand that, and I would be too, because I think what you're saying is spot on.
Thank you. And I know from my research, so in some of our conversations as well, that you are somewhat of an expert on the MTSS. And part of the reason I think that Jeffco grabbed you to come in here, and I know a lot of the special ed parents who have worked with you are just so delighted and relieved that you're here. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
The next one is going to be, some students with disability will be in person while the rest of the district is on remote. It's hard to tell who is eligible. How do I know whether my child with an IEP can attend?
So we, the guidance that has come out, it does feel a little nebulous, and that's very intentional. And I will just say that one of the things that gets school districts in trouble, particularly as it relates to students with disabilities, is when they say always and never, or only this group or only that group. And so we've been very careful to craft our language so that it doesn't sound like, well, if you're in this group, you get it, and if you're not in this group, forget it. What I will tell you is that we've been really intentional about trying to serve students that we know could not access remote instruction. So I just want to preface this by saying I know that there are a lot of students with IEPs who struggled mightily with remote instruction. I'm talking about the students who, because their disability was so significant, they couldn't access it at all. And so we wanted to continue to serve those students in person. But we also know, so these are generally students that we would see in our center programs. So they're in a self-contained program. Those are reserved for our students with the most significant disabilities. But we also know that there are some other students who may not be in a center program, but still could not access remote instruction. And so we wanted to make sure that we didn't close this door on students who might need that. And so when we put guidance out to schools, if we were to say only center program students get this, when any parent said, well, I think my kid might need this, the answer would have been, nope, the district said only center students. So we wanted to be really careful about that. And also just to reinforce that it's really an IEP team decision. It's not my decision. It's really the people who know that student best who say, yes, based on what we knew about this child, they really need to be in person. And so that's largely why that guidance sounded a little nebulous. And if you are a parent and you think that your child falls into that category, then you should reach out to your child's school and talk to them about that.
Okay. And I know that you also advertise on the special education page on the Jeffco District website. You have a special education hotline phone number too, where people can call.
Absolutely. And I don't know that off the top of my head, but at some point I can look it up and we can put it in the chat. But I would also just say that, the best place to start is with your school, but our schools don't, for a variety of reasons, don't always have the right answer. And so what I try to stress to parents whenever possible is if the answer you get doesn't sound right or it's not meeting your needs, please call us and let us know, because we want to help work through that situation. And that special ed hotline number is a really great resource to get to the right person, because the person who monitors that line works directly with our executive director and directors of special ed, and they will make sure that your question or concern gets answered, or that we connect you with the right person who can help you.
Fantastic. Well, that's a new addition, and I know everybody's really excited about it. So thank you for that as
Yeah.
well. The next one is, our mental health or social emotional supports available for students during remote. How can I access them or refer a child in need of help?
Yeah, this is important. And I actually just did an interview with one of the area papers about this. We get lots of questions, and we know that many students and their families are struggling right now. So I know we've heard from Colorado Crisis Services that their calls to their hotline are up 58%. The good news about that is people are calling for help, and that's really positive, but it's really reflective of the extent to which people are struggling right now. So everything we do, and there are lots of people who are related to mental health in our schools. So there are school counselors, social emotional learning specialists, behavior specialists, those are not in every single school, but school counselors, school psychologists, school social workers. We've really focused a lot this year on teaming and making sure that they're all working together as a team to make sure that all students' needs are met. The other thing that they've worked a lot on since March is adapting every single thing that they do so that it can be delivered remotely. So even though we've moved most students to a remote environment, all of those same services that these professionals provide should be continuing. The other thing is that every school has a link on their school website for additional mental health support. So if you know a child or your child is struggling, you should be able to go on your school's website and fill out a Google form that would go straight to the school counselor so that they can provide additional support and reach out. The other thing I would point you to is our mental health hub on the Jeffco, and I believe it's on the Restart webpage, but there we have a mental health hub that has tons of resources for students and families. There's actually a really cool virtual calming room that we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from families that they're having their children go on that and that they've had a lot of success with that. But there are just any number of resources related to mental health and how to get help on that hub. We've taken everything we have from anybody that is related to mental health, and we've put everything in one place so that you're not having to try and navigate 10 different places on the district's website to find what you're looking for.
Oh, phenomenal. So this next one, there's actually two questions here. So I'll start out with the first one. Is the right sizing policies in center programs, will they ever be eliminated?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That right sizing is something that was very foreign to me when I came to Jeffco, and so I had lots of questions about it. I'm not a fan of right sizing, and there I can tell you how this started, and I will just tell you how it was explained to me. So this happened before my time in Jeffco, but my understanding was that there were kind of some loose practices related to staffing. And so if a principal had the right connection at the district office and called and said, hey, I need another person, they got it. And then a principal who maybe didn't have the right connections didn't get it. And so there was a lot of inequity in how programs may have gotten or not gotten additional support. And there were some budgetary issues. So there were some need to get the budget back in line. So there was some spending that was really kind of unaccounted for, and it was related to this. So to answer that, they developed this right sizing process where twice a year they would look at the enrollment in every center program, and then they would look at the staffing in the program to ensure that the ratios were the ratios that had been set forth by the district. And so if a program was understaffed, we would add and we would give permission to the principal to hire additional people, and we would tell them how many. You're understaffed by 2, so you have permission to go hire 2 people. On the flip side of that, if they were overstaffed, we got move the people out. And so what we would do is move them to one of those programs that was understaffed. So you can imagine that this is really disruptive. So a child spends 6 months building a relationship with a paraprofessional, and then we say, nope, you're overstaffed. We're going to move you to this school. And then we start over somewhere else. And so it was an answer at the time to a problem that they had, that I think over time in my opinion, is probably not the best way to do it. So we absolutely are looking. We've gotten sidelined a little bit by COVID. So this is something that we were examining in the spring of last year and hoping to roll out um, a new way of doing business this year, and then COVID kind of brought everything to a grinding halt. But yes, the short answer is yes, I plan to eliminate them. I'm not exactly sure what we're going to replace them with, but we are looking at a few different models.
Well, thank you. And the next one is, are the SSN programs, and I'll let you clarify the acronyms for everyone.
Yes.
Are the SSN programs ever going to go back to the 2-to-1 ratio that they were a few years ago? Currently, the highest needs kids in the district are at the 3-to-1 ratio.
Mm-hmm. So SSN stands for significant support needs. So these are some of our most significantly disabled students. And they are in a self-contained setting, meaning that a team has decided that they are have little access to their non-disabled peers. So they require such an intensive level of support that they need this specialized setting. Uh, so prior to me coming here, my understanding is correct that this was, they were a 2-to-1 ratio, meaning that there was an adult for every 2 students. My understanding is in a lot of the decisions we make in Jeffco and in Colorado, I would just say, are related to funding and a lack of funding. Special education is funded differently, little differently in Colorado. It's something called categorical funding, where their funding is based on their label rather than the level of support that they need. So where I come from in Florida, the funding was really based on the different services that the student needed. So the students like this who needed more supports, their funding was higher. And so it created a system where you had the support to provide what was needed. It's a little different here. So every time we make a decision, there's no influx of money coming in. So as many of you know, there have been ongoing concerns about the lack of support at the secondary level. That is a whole nother topic that is also agree and very warranted discussion, but will for another time. At the time that this decision was made, there was pretty big outcry for additional supports at middle schools because they felt like students were coming out of elementary and then there wasn't the level of support. Students in center programs, there wasn't the level of support in the middle school that they needed. And so the decision was made to change the ratio in order to free up funding to provide some additional supports at the middle school level. So there's never there's always a kind of this, like, if I do this, then where am I going to take it from? And in this case, it was, we changed the ratio. Now, having said that, I will tell you that I hadn't been in a district that had a 2-to-1 ratio. So the district I came from, that was significantly larger, and we had 5 schools that were like Fletcher Miller. 5 separate standing schools that serve students like Fletcher Miller, in addition to all of our separate center programs that were placed in schools, like the SSM program. So we had a pretty significant population, and the city was also one of the 3 sites in the country that the military sent their personnel to work if they had a medically fragile or really involved child. So we had lots of pretty complicated kids. And our lowest ratio is a 3-to-1 in that district. So I was really surprised that we even had a 2-to-1 here. But also, when you have something and then somebody takes it away, it's pretty significant, right? So what I will tell you right now is that we're examining all things special ed in Jeffco right now. Special ed is a little different than what I'm accustomed to here, and it's I think we have a room for improvement. I think that there are a lot of super talented people here, and that we can do some really incredible things, but it's going to take some revisioning. And so this is one of the things that we're working on right now. But as I said before, some of it comes down to funding and what we're able to provide based on the funding that we have. So I'm not sure if that's.
It is. So, and that's, that's one of the legislative priorities of Jeffco PTA and Colorado PTA, and has been for years and years. And even at the national PTA level, we've been advocating for the special education funding as well, amongst other things being addressed. So I'll move on to the next question. So, but in the middle, I just have to tell you, the number of people who actually just registered so they could get the recording and then telling you thank you,
Oh,
it is kind of astronomical. So
oh,
clearly
thank
that these
you.
are, I guess we need to start a fan club so we could maybe have some of our next activities. So the parents who've helped, a lot of them are saying thank you for all the help that you're doing and all the work that you're doing during, especially during this challenging time.
Yeah,
The
I
next one
know.
is, will there be an effort to have young students like pre-K to twice to second grade back to in-person schooling when testing becomes more widely available?
Mhm. So there are several things here. So first of all, I will say that the reason that we have shifted to a remote model is not because we didn't feel that we had a safe environment. It was because operationally it was becoming untenable because the state switched the way we do quarantine procedures. So we were operating under a targeted quarantine process where significantly less staff and students were being quarantined. And so you may have read some articles in the paper about, the governor issued some guidance and said there's no reason kids can't be in school. And a lot of districts pushed back and said, well, yeah, there is, because you switched the rules on us and we can't, it's untenable. We don't have the staff to keep things moving with the rate at which we're having to quarantine people. So one of the things I'm really proud of is that we have worked very, very closely with Jefferson County Public Health since the beginning.
Mhm.
We meet with them weekly. They know everything we're doing. We run everything by them. And if they don't think it's a good idea, we don't do it. And the thing I always say is I'm not a doctor and I'm not a public health expert. I'm an educator. And so I want them to weigh in. And if they think something's not safe or we should or shouldn't be doing something, I'm taking their lead because that's their area of expertise. So they also share the same goal as we do. They want kids in school. We want kids in school. And we've really tried to lead the way on that because we realize not only the impact it's having on children, but the significant social, emotional, fiscal impact this is having on families. When we moved to remote, and again, it was largely operational, we did talk to them about some plans to bring some selected groups of students in. And with their support, we have 5 groups that we will continue on Monday seeing in person. And one of those are the students with significant disabilities that I was talking about before. Pre-K will still be in person. Childcare will still be running. We have some students that are in some CTE, like the career and tech ed program. So you can imagine a high school student who goes to Warren Tech and he's working toward industry certification and he needs to be on a lathe or a drill press or some machinery that it is not possible for him to do at home. And if they don't continue that, we've kind of derailed their program for them. And so we've asked if those, and it doesn't mean that every student does it, just the ones that really need it so that they don't get derailed, that those students would be coming in. And let me think, there's one other thing. I said pre-K, special ed, childcare, CTE.
I think, bottom line, I know I'm on the monitoring committee for the district
Yeah,
and everybody, so everyone who works in Jeffco wants our kids back in school.
yeah.
So, and I know that from our conversations that staffing issue has just been a huge, huge problem, to the point that I know that we've had marketing communications people and staff members who don't have teaching certificates sitting in classrooms to
Sure.
make sure students are okay because we don't have the staff members to do it. So it's a
Yeah.
pandemic, and our advice at PTA is to please just give grace to everyone. It's a hard time. Nobody's done this before. And there have been bumps, and there are going to be more bumps. But overall, I think the response has been phenomenal.
Yeah, we have over 50, in fact, might be over 60 district level staff, almost 30 just from my division, who we have reassigned to teaching positions this year. They've gone on a temporary reassignment in order for us to be able to provide both in-person learning and remote learning for families who needed remote. And we just didn't have enough staff to do that. In addition to that, then we've had the rest of our district staff who have been going out when a school gets quarantined or a cohort gets quarantined. Our staff has been going out to fill in the gaps that are left in schools. And sometimes it's just being a monitor in a classroom because the teacher's quarantined. So she's teaching remotely from home, but the kids are in school. So we just want somebody to be in there to make sure everybody's safe. And if they need something, there's an adult there. But it's been a very unusual year. It's definitely been a team effort, and nobody's job this year looks like it did before this started. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's been really challenging.
it truly, truly is. The next one is asking about a GT student struggling with perfection issues, having constant meltdowns. How do you support that, and how can you get help?
Yeah. So the first thing I usually look as a psychologist, I'm looking at frequency, intensity, and duration. So how often is this happening? How intense is it? Are we talking about a child who's teary-eyed, or are they full sobbing, um, really incapacitated? And then how long? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 2 hours? And is this happening daily? Is it happening 5 times a day? Is it once a month? So trying to kind of look at those just those basic aspects to kind of help me to understand, like, how serious of a problem is this and what kind of intervention do we need? Is this some gentle, some proactive strategies and reminders, or are we like really needing something more intense? Then I would be looking at what kinds of things are causing or preempting this meltdown. What's happening before that? Is it because I'm really perfectionistic and I don't think I did well enough on this, or I got a bad grade, or I'm just overwhelmed with the amount of work? So some of the strategies that I've talked about earlier also feed into these things. So using the positive praise, don't connect the praise to their performance, but more to their effort and their process and their finishing things. Normalizing, sharing your own experiences, um, doing the problem solving that I talked about before. So what do you think you should do? Let's brainstorm about this. Let's problem solve around this. What would you do? Be a calm sounding board for your child. Um, if this all sounds like, yeah, did all that, we're talking way worse than that. One of the things I would be doing is partnering with the school, because there are some things that they can do to help intervene at the school. But if you feel like this is just all encompassing and it's really affecting your home life and you feel like it's not tenable for you, then I would reach out to someone, because I think that um, there there are a lot of good strategies and that a child can learn that. And I, trust me, been through this with my own kids. Sometimes your kids don't listen to you, so you can tell them a million things and they're like, you're just an idiot, you're just my mom, you don't know. But let someone else tell them and they're all ears. So sometimes you just need to reach out to someone else for that additional help. So I think that I would be listening for the level of severity of it to know which step I would take next.
Okay, thank you. And we'll be doing actually some videos with Casey Gardner, so who's a social
Oh,
worker.
great. Yeah, I love
Yeah,
Casey
with
also.
coping strategies. We've done some other with another behavioral
Yeah.
health professional as well, but we'll be doing some more of those as well. The
Yeah.
next one, oh, go ahead.
I'll just say one more thing. Our SHAC, if you're familiar with SHAC, it's our Student Health Advisory team or committee. I met with them last week, and these are high school students, and they're also developing some mental health resources for students. And one of them is around coping strategies, and they're actually doing films where they're going to model coping strategies for students. And so I'll be sharing those out, and I'll share them with you, Shauna, when they're done, so that we
Yeah.
can get them out.
Oh,
Like
absolutely. We
peer-to-peer
will.
support.
Well, and I think that's really important, especially as your kids get older. So those later elementary years, when, we become the parents who don't know anything.
Yeah.
So the later elementary years, and it's really hard to connect to the teens and tweens, at their level. So if you haven't had a teen or a tween, um, they reject a lot of things unless you bring it to them at a certain level and treat them like the adults they think they are, right?
For sure.
So the next one is about twice exceptional student not doing homework, not logging in, not participating in school. What is a parent to do?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that going on right now. I'm hearing from lots of people who are experiencing the same thing. So the first thing I'll say is you're not alone. The second thing I would say is to reach out to your school for some support. I just got a really great story from a parent a couple weeks ago who was experiencing this exact thing. Child middle schooler, would not come out of the bedroom, wasn't doing homework, refusing everything. And mom called the school, and they immediately like sprung into action. And the student had a particular teacher that she really loved and had a good relationship with. That teacher called and said, "Hey, I don't live far from you. Do you want to go to Starbucks?" And they just had a team approach to trying to get this kid back into school, and they did eventually get her back into school. It took a few days of problem solving and figuring. But one of the things I always say about Jeffco is I've been so impressed since I've been here with the quality of professionals that we have here and the extent to which they care for students and that they go above and beyond for students. So one of the things I would do is call the school and just explain to them, hey, this is what's going on, and see if they have anything to offer. The other thing I would say is when we're talking about 2E students, what is that second E? Is it anxiety? Is it autism? What is it? And what supports do they need based on that part of what they're experiencing? Let the school deal with the gifted part, and you try to deal with the second E part. And sometimes that requires you being an advocate for your child. So while some schools are doing what I just talked about, I know that there may be a situation that isn't like that, and where you feel like, well, I've already talked to the school and they're not doing anything. So then it's time for you to be an advocate for your student. And whether they have a 504 or an IEP, if they're twice exceptional, you can request a meeting and say, hey, something's not working and we're going to need some additional support. We need to review what's happening. That's your right as a parent under either of those scenarios, whether they have a 504 or an IEP. You can request a meeting at any time. If the student's not being successful, typically we would expect the school to initiate a meeting like that. But I also know that times are very unusual right now, and that's not always happening. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, that is
yeah.
another really, really good point. The next one, I appreciate that you encourage the advocacy piece too. So because I think a lot of the work that I've personally done with parents are, either they have the GT endorsement or they have the special education endorsement, but they don't have both. but the
Yeah.
child's still struggling. And I think a lot of times it ends up being something that hasn't been identified yet.
Yes.
And I can say that you have been a huge assistance, as have a couple people in the GT department, in making sure that we go and get those kids tested, and then we can identify what the second E is, and then help those kids further. The next one is about a student, second grade, who has huge anxiety. This will be a little different, I think, probably now that we're in a remote space, but a second grade student with huge anxiety has been acting out, getting in fights, causing issues in the classroom, refusing to do work. This is, I think some of the same twice exceptional story, but maybe not
Yeah.
identified.
Yeah, when I read this, I think the first thing, and I know things are a little different now that we've shifted over to a remote, but I don't anticipate that to last long. I do think, especially for these younger ones, those younger kids are going to be our first priority, and I think that we will, as quickly as we can, start shifting some kids back into in person. This is the group that it's going to be. So. Um, my first order of business for this scenario would be to ask for an FBA. And if you're not familiar with that, an FBA is a functional behavioral assessment. And what that is almost like a scientific way of helping to problem solve around a behavior. So we look at the antecedent, or what happens directly before the behavior, and then the behavior itself, and then what happens directly after, because we want to look at what do we think is causing it, then what happens, and then are we unwittingly reinforcing this, and we're increasing the likelihood that it's going to happen again by our behavior. So for example, if you had a student, this is just a simple example, that is struggling with reading. So every day during reading, he acts up. And the teacher calls the principal and says, Johnny's acting up. You need to take him down to the office. And the principal takes him down to the office, and he gets a lollipop, and he gets to sit on her lap and help her do work or answer the phone. And they notice every day Johnny keeps acting up during reading. So instead of addressing the issue, which was he's struggling with reading and he's rather um, look like the class clown than look like he doesn't know how to read. And then we've reinforced him because he's having a whole lot of fun when he goes down to the principal's office. So, hey, why not? I'm not going to struggle through reading when I can go down and be the principal's helper. So when we do an FBA, we kind of look at all of those things and say what's happening right before and what's happening right after. And when I worked as a school psychologist with school teams and families, what I would say to them is, if I had a magic wand and I could fix one behavior that would have the single biggest impact on this child's day-to-day functioning, what would that be? I realize there's, like in this scenario, he's causing fights and he's disrupting and he's not doing work, and he has anxiety, but what's the biggest thing we can fix that will have the largest impact on everything else? And that's what we target first. And then we start looking at the behavior very systematically from that point. So for me, when I hear this description, that would be my first order of business, because what we would do is go in and do some observations and collect data. And when I look at that data, I can see, is, for example, the example I just gave you, is it happening just during reading? Is this a child who goes to non-custodial parents on the weekend, and every Friday afternoon they're really agitated, or Monday morning they're really agitated? Is this a morning thing, they're not getting sleep? Is it afternoon, before lunch, after lunch? So you can kind of identify all of these patterns in their behavior, and then that helps you to know, okay, we're seeing this is happening like around 10 o'clock every morning, so around 10 o'clock we're going to do this. And that's how you start intervening in that behavior in a very systematic way. Also, there's some things that you can craft interventions around anxiety and helping the child to identify, like the physiological signs of anxiety. What does my body feel like? And so I know when I start feeling this way, here's my calming strategy. Here's what I do. Here's our plan for how to deal with that. So there's different things you could hit in this scenario, but an FBA would be my first order of business. And you can ask the school to do that.
Perfect. Well, and when you talk about the calming strategies, coping strategies, um, I ask parents to please learn these and do them at home so you're modeling them, and then we're normalizing the behavior for our own kids as well. So
Absolutely.
I say that because I realized I made the mistake myself when my daughter was going through elementary and they were learning all of those coping strategies. And I, expected her to just absorb it because she was, learning it at school. And I realized I never learned what they were as much as they were in school. So I just kept saying, come on now, use your coping strategies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that just hit me, about a year and a half ago when I was at a mental health seminar. And I went, wow, that was a failure on my part. So, I made a mistake. So now I have learned them. So when we can model them together, we all need them from time to time.
Yes, for sure.
Um, so the next one is a great one. So about the recent community budget survey that's out. So this person had noticed there's a question in there about reducing special education supports. Wondering why that's in there because she thought that was a different fund and it couldn't be reduced.
Yeah. So it's interesting. They actually called me about that, and they said they were worried that if they didn't put it in, it would be viewed as that we never thought of it. And so they felt like they needed to include it. There are there's a little bit of both. So there's some of our funding is IDEA, and that's very prescriptive. We can't just do away with that. But that IDEA, and this has been a problem since its inception, it's never been fully funded. In fact, it's a fraction of what we spend on special education
I think
funding.
it was
So
less than 8%, correct?
um,
Federal funding is less than 8% for special.
yeah, I don't remember the exact percentage, to be honest with you. I just don't want to say something that's
Sure.
incorrect, but it's woefully inadequately funded. And so we do use a lot of our general fund dollars to support special ed. So it is something that would be on the table, although I don't anticipate that there's any appetite to reduce that. But the fear was that if it wasn't included, that people would think we just never thought of it, of having it. And so that it was left out of the equation, and it certainly hasn't been.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And I know that the
Sure.
survey was also developed by an outside firm. So it's it's not worded real well. So, and I know that, a lot of us have
I've
talked to
heard that.
district staff and board members about that. So, so I think that that'll probably be addressed by both the district staff and the board. So, down
Yes.
the road. The next one is, she says, what are any thoughts on what she calls the code of silence around either identification and referrals to special education and or sharing with parents that assessment results are consistent with particular disabilities such as dyslexia or ASD. Teachers seem scared to identify and refer, and we all know districts continue to state that they do not diagnose. I know they cannot diagnose, but they can share additional details with parents so they are not left in the dark. We did not know our son was dyslexic for an entire year. Assessment results are challenging for parents to interpret. Good point.
Yeah, these are all really good points and true. And there's I'm not sure how the culture got to be this way, again, because I'm fairly new coming into it here. But I also have had many parents who have said to me, I've had to fight for everything every step of the way. It's been an uphill battle, and that's not how I was brought up in my career. I always felt like it was our job to be the facilitators. It's not coming out of my pocket. My job's here to help you. So if I can help you. And the other thing to me that's really counterintuitive is that when we identify students that are eligible, and certainly wouldn't want to identify a student who's not truly eligible. We only want the students who are eligible, but when we do, we do get extra funding to support them. So it's always been kind of curious to me why we wouldn't identify a student who truly needed extra support, because that only benefits all of us if we do. We have been working really hard to change that. One of the things that we're working on that I feel really strongly about is something that's called the facilitated IEP process. And it really provides training to school staff on how to interact with these issues and then how to conduct themselves in an IEP meeting. So for parents who have been, and I have sat in many of them, and not just in Jeffco, in other districts as well, that just felt really yucky. And the use of lots of acronyms, it's very intimidating as a parent. When my kids were smaller, I was not an educated professional, and I had the experience of having a son with ADHD and going to the school and saying, I think there's a problem, and kind of being belittled and told, oh, there's no problem, and don't worry, we'll take care of it, and he doesn't need to be tested. Kind of that whole thing, that whole code of silence, that we're not going to test him, we're not going to identify him, you're overreacting, this isn't really not a problem. And I knew there was a problem. So I've been on both sides of the table, and because of that, I think it's very important that our staff understand how to respond to those kinds of requests. One of my pet peeves is when a parent calls and says they asked for testing and the school talked them out of it and said they didn't need it. Not our job to do that. Our job is to honor the request unless there's some really compelling evidence to suggest that there's just no reason to do testing. But my guidance to schools is always that we honor the request, and our parents are the most knowledgeable about their children, so we're going to honor their request. And then once we do that evaluation, if there's no evidence to support eligibility, well, then that's fine. I'll back you on that, because then we have the evidence to support it. But to just shut a parent down and say, well, we're just not going to do it in the first place, that's really it doesn't do much to foster a good working relationship with a family. So we're working on some of those things. I do acknowledge that, and it's not, I just want to be careful to not generalize that everybody in the district is this way, because we have some people that are really doing amazing things, but I also have heard this side of it as well. The other thing I would just say is, if you have a situation where you've talked to the teacher or the counselor and you feel like you're kind of getting that, no, don't worry about it, or no, you don't need to do this, or we're not going to share with you, there's always someone above that person. So you can talk to the principal. You can, we always recommend that you start with your direct contact, but just know that you are your child's advocate. So if you're not getting the right answer, or if it doesn't feel good and you want to check with somebody, you can check with the principal, you can call the special ed hotline, you can call the assistant director or community superintendent, and get more information if you're wondering about that.
So appreciate that you've been available to do that. You've helped so many families. Thank you for all of that one-on-one support. The next one is, are there any peer tutoring programs right now? Since there were various tutoring programs at schools, are there any virtual tutoring programs?
That's a great question, and that is not one that would fall under my division, but I can certainly find out and let you know. I know that we've had some outreach from some community groups that are, they want to partner with the district to do some of that work. So the other thing, and I think we're supposed to be engaging them in the very near future, but the other thing I will say is that because of the site autonomy in Jeffco, I suspect that there are lots of incredible things happening, but they're usually on a school by school basis rather than a district wide initiative. So I will check with Matt Flores in the chief academic officer, because that's the division that would be heading that up. And then Shauna, I can let you know what I find out, and you can put the word out.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. The next one, this person's already obviously done some research about you, like I have as well. So, and heard about the work that you did at a school in Florida to help students with reading challenges.
Mm.
And she's wondering about, she talks about the Colorado Springs school that addressed dyslexia. Is there any talk in
Yeah.
Jeffco about exploring something similar to that?
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad you asked about that. We actually we're on track to open a pilot this year in Alameda at Alameda Junior Senior High, and we got derailed because of COVID, because the staff was supposed to go for OG Orton Gillingham training, and it got canceled because of COVID. So we didn't have the ability to get the staff trained in the multisensory instruction techniques that we want to be all hallmark of that program. So we are back on track for next fall, hoping this will be grades 7, 8, and 9. Parents can apply through the Enroll Jeffco to be a part of that program. And we're hoping to do next year, like kind of a proof of concept model, and then expand. And this is what we did. And I was a part of that in my former district. We started with a proof of concept model, we expanded, and then eventually we got to the point where we repurposed a school, and we had a whole school that was for students with learning disabilities and very specialized. But we started with a pilot similar to what we're doing at Alameda. So we are working on that. And my goal is for us to, at the very least, have an entire feeder pattern, so that we have that a student feasibly could go all the way through school with those very specific supports that are needed. But I'm also a big believer that we should have some multisensory trained staff in every building. But we're getting there. We're taking a step at a time, but we're making progress.
Well, thank you. I'm going to go through a couple more of these questions. We didn't quite book enough time. So clearly, I think we could talk to you all day long. So, and come up with even more questions. So we'll finish what we can here by the 11:30 deadline. And then what I will do is let you know what the other questions were. It sounds like since you are developing such a fan club, that it might also be a good idea if we do this again as people hear
Sure.
about.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
I suspect you're going to have even more questions that parents want to talk about once we see this. So maybe we can look at next month or the month after to do
Sure.
another Ask Dr. Leach event. So
Sure.
clearly you are a favorite. There's another one here that kind of ties into the subject of dyslexia. And she says something about several of the schools don't want the word dyslexia to be written on an IEP. Is this a
Yeah.
Jeffco message, or is this it just seems like there's a big issue with dyslexia not being identified here.
Yeah, that's been a really common issue, and it's not Jeffco specific. We dealt with the same thing in any district I've been in. And so the party line, and the whole time I was coming up in my career, the party line was dyslexia is a medical diagnosis, and we're not doctors, and we can't diagnose dyslexia. And so it was like a dirty word in education. You weren't allowed to say it. The feds put out guidance. Gosh, it's probably been close to 5 years ago now, that said, not only is it okay to say dyslexia, you can say it in an IEP. We can do evaluations for it, but the myth lives on, and we hear this constantly from parents. And honestly, in Florida, it was the same thing. I would say at least every other week or so, I would get a parent who would call and say, I think my child's dyslexic, and I asked the school to test, and they said they don't test for dyslexia. Well, we do test for learning disabilities, and that's the educational classification that we use in schools. And yes, absolutely, we test for that, and we can test for that. So um, it's it's always a challenge. We try to provide that guidance regularly, and I think people get a little when you say diagnosis, that school-based folks usually they're right away they're like, we don't diagnose. I'm not allowed to diagnose. So, but what we do is test and identify and determine eligibility for learning disabilities, and those strategies that we would employ for dyslexia and learning disabilities are one and the same. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. There's another one here too. The behavioral analysts in Jeffco are amazing. So
Yeah.
she said she's aware of parents requesting for the FBA, and it can take weeks to get to the child due to how busy those people are. Is there any chance we can hire more people? And she knows we have budget problems, but had to ask.
Yeah, those are one of the groups that I feel like we get the biggest bang for our buck with. And man, I wish that we had the budget to hire one for every single school, because I think they do so much good and really practical work that is helpful for all students. So yes, it's always a budget issue. Um, I think, one of the things I said earlier is that we're looking at all things special ed. And so we're looking at where are we getting the most bang for our buck? What can we use more of? What can we use less of? And those are all the things that we're kind of looking at. But right now, I would be lying to you if I said, oh yeah, we're going to add a bunch of them. Because honestly, it's really, it's we don't know what's going to happen funding wise. We're coming up on what may be a couple really rough years. And so being able to save all of our positions will be a big win. And I don't, I wouldn't want to lead anybody down this path thinking we're going to be adding a bunch of people. But I do agree. I think they're amazing. And I think they do really great hands-on work that you see the benefit of immediately when they're involved. So yeah, no
Absolutely.
argument for me on that.
Absolutely. And I can name a whole bunch of other professionals that would be nice to
Yeah.
on as well.
Yeah.
So this is another one, this is a really good one to piggyback on that last one about diagnosis. Parents want to know where they can go to get dyslexia testing, and where does this, let's see, is it at or below 12% in order to qualify for special education come from? Where do those percentages, is that a federal or state thing? Where does that come from?
Yeah, I think that CDE puts out some of those guidelines, but I always caution people from getting really rigidly stuck on rules like that, because those kinds of rules do not hold up in a court of law. So you might use that as a guideline, but I would not deny somebody eligibility based on one of those percentages. I would be very careful. And what I usually try to guide people in is really looking at a preponderance of information. Where are all of the stars aligning? And if your evidence is really compelling toward one area, and then you have this one outlier, I would not deny someone eligibility based on that outlier. So where can parents go? Well, my first thing is going to be that you have every right to get an evaluation from the school district, and it doesn't cost you anything. There are lots of private providers that do testing, and you can go to, and we have to consider those results. The one thing I'll just say that some parents get really frustrated by, and this isn't a Jeffco rule, it's just because of the way we determine eligibility. Sometimes parents will go to a private provider and get an assessment done, and the private provider will say, diagnosis dyslexia. And then they'll come in and say, here, my child needs an IEP because they diagnosed them with dyslexia. And the a note on a prescription pad or a report with a diagnosis does not automatically equal a 504 or an IEP. And that's not the district rule. Those are state and federal guidelines that we go by. So students have to meet eligibility criteria. And sometimes a provider won't do all of the tests that are necessary for us to determine eligibility. So it's very frustrating for a parent to pay money, sometimes upwards of a couple $1,000s, to get an evaluation done. And then they bring it to us and it doesn't have all of the stuff that we are required by law to consider. And so then we'll have to say, yes, but we also need this and this. And that's very frustrating to parents. So I always, you're entitled to an evaluation from the school. That's usually my first line of defense. But if you're not comfortable with that, or you want to go someplace else, there are some great providers out there as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Quick note from Casey. So she said it's not free, but there is actual university students who are providing tutoring sessions virtually.
Oh, awesome.
It's through the Mindful Learner. So just FYI on that one. And then I'm going to go through, I think this will probably be our last question. It's a little deep. So it's a student at school who has been suicidal. There is a bullying situation and they haven't received assistance through the school. What can they do?
Okay. So I will say what I said earlier. If you do not get assistance from the school, my first thing would be go to the principal. If you're not getting assistance from the principal has a boss, just like I have a boss. If I'm not doing my job satisfactorily, I would expect someone to go to my boss and say, hey, I needed this and Susan Leach isn't doing it. And so particularly in a situation like this, that's pretty dire, you need support. The other thing I would say is that we have a suicide prevention office here. They're pretty incredible. They do some amazing work, and they're often really good liaisons with the school, and they can follow up with the mental health team at the school to make sure that they're providing the supports. They can also give the family great resources. They can hook the family up with community resources that they can take advantage of. So there's lots of things that they can do at the district level if they're not getting the support that they need directly at the school.
Wonderful. Can you tell me just a quick question? I know Jeffco had committed to trying to make sure that all staff members were trained in the suicide prevention QPR response. And I know COVID has kind of sidetracked a lot of that. So, is there, how are we doing getting that going? So, because
Yeah,
that's a personal goal of mine. And
yeah,
happy to
me
help. We're
too.
happy to help too, of course, as you know.
Yeah, so we ended up switching over to the online administration of QPR. And so we bought, I believe, 20,000 licenses. This was the year that we really wanted to target our classified professionals. So our paraprofessionals, our transportation, bus drivers, food service workers, all of those other people in the district that interact with kids. And so one of the really great opportunities we had this year was that we had that 2 weeks at the beginning where we did the soft start. So students weren't in school. And now again, we're pivoting to remote. And so we have a lot of people who normally we don't have as an audience for professional learning that we are now have time for them to do these things. So we're in a good place, and that's what we're targeting with them now, is that they need to take the online version of QPR.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, that excites me a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I am so grateful to you. I can't even express the amount of help that you have given. You truly do so much wonderful work, around student success and really supporting students and families. And clearly, your experience as a parent so guides this information. So and guides your work. So we are so so very grateful to you. You have been such an amazing partner, and you are such a gift to Jeffco. So thank you. And yes, you're getting thank yous in the chat as well. So you've got a ton of thank yous, people who didn't even join the video, but just wanted to say thank you for your work. So huge thanks. You are wonderful. We thank you so much for joining us the day before Thanksgiving. So amazing. We're
Yeah,
thankful for
this
you.
is the best part of what I do. I
Aw.
love helping families and making sure that they're getting what they need. So it's my pleasure, really.
Cool. Well, I'm going to get out my pom poms. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We appreciate you so, so very much. And wow, just amazing that you would take your time to join us today. So thank you, Dr. Leach. You are phenomenal.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate